the Soviet Union had an economic collapse, and it collapsed into 15 successor states. And I mention this because at that moment, the United States said, oh my God, now we made it. We're alone. We run the world. And believe me, that's how they felt. And that was an illusion, a delusion. They thought Russia, that's a nothing. And they thought China, don't they grow rice there? That's an impoverished country of villages. We don't even have to worry about that. We are the sole superpower of the world. Well, that's not how economics works, actually, because Adam Smith's insight is completely right, which is that if you are fortunate to have open trade, peace, and good economic policies, you get a lot of catching up by the transmission of knowledge, technology, and the opportunities for rapid advance. So while the United States wasn't watching, and I know they weren't watching because they're not very clever there in Washington, I have to tell you, and they don't understand much of economics at all. They weren't paying attention, but China was growing at 10% per year, thank you. The war in Ukraine came because the United States said after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we'll move all our military bases up to the Russian border. And by the way, in 1990, when Germany was reunifying and President Gorbachev was president still of the Soviet Union, the United States promised President Gorbachev, if you, the Soviet Union, agree to the reunification of Germany, which had been divided after World War II in the Cold War, and required the Soviet approval because that was how World War II ended by treaty in 1990. The only real treaty that ended World War II was in 1990. They needed the Soviet agreement. And to get the Soviet agreement, the United States said to President Gorbachev, we promise NATO won't move 1 inch eastward. Not 1 inch. And if you want all the documentary record of that, go to a website called National Security Archive of George Washington University, and go to a website that is called What Gorbachev Heard, and you'll find 42 documents or so that say all of what I just said, that the U.S. promised NATO would never enlarge. But as soon as the Soviet Union ended and the United States said, we're all alone in this, then they started exactly what they promised they wouldn't do, which was eastward enlargement of NATO. And that's why there's the war in Ukraine. It's a disgrace. And it is killing the Ukrainians. And it is part of the famous adage of Henry Kissinger, which you may recall, that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. Ukraine said, we'll be a friend, and now they're dying because of that, because they said, okay, NATO enlarged. The United States said, we have your back, and probably 2 million Ukrainians have been killed or gravely wounded in this completely unnecessary and reckless war. And the United States is doing the same with Israel in Gaza. And let me thank you, South Africa, for standing up for justice. It was very brave, very right, very precise to launch the International Court of Justice case on Israel's violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention. The ICJ takes too long to rule, but the evidence that South Africa brought on behalf of the whole world is absolutely right and compelling. So we're in the age of rebalancing, and that's why I liked the title, Reclaiming the Future, because it's not only claiming the future, it is reclaiming what should have been. Had Adam Smith been listened to because he was very decent, this would not have been 200 years of imperialism. This would have been open trade, exchange of ideas, exchange of knowledge. There would have been development in all parts of the world. The imperial age delayed that terribly. I don't have to recount any of that for you here, especially. But I would just say that, to my mind, the greatest crime of imperialism, and imperialism is filled with criminality of the worst kind, but the greatest crime of imperialism, in my view, is the denial of knowledge and of education to the people. Because the basic idea of imperialism, of course, is plunder and extraction and domination. And the basic mechanism of that is to disempower the people. And the most basic empowerment of people, individually and as societies, is knowledge. It is exactly what you say, sapientia. It is knowledge for the people is the most powerful way to advance. It's the essential standard of economic and social development, and it's precisely what the imperialists denied. And by the way, when imperialism ended in Africa, when you looked at the scene, and there's a fascinating study by UNESCO called Illiteracy in the World in 1950, which you can find online because this new organization, UNESCO, in the middle of the 20th century, made a study of worldwide illiteracy. Most of sub-Saharan Africa had illiteracy rates of more than 90%, some between 95 and 100%. That means that when independence came, there had been no education for the people, other than the tiniest exceptions. You know this. This was the mechanism of control. This has made every challenge a challenge of gaining knowledge and of spreading information as absolutely the core of reclaiming the future. I want solidarity across countries and across the world. And for Africa, solidarity for me means African unity, true African unity. African unity started as an organizational form in 1963. The United States, Britain, and France hated it. They don't want African unity. When they saw leaders that would unify, like Patrice Lumumba, they killed them or they overthrew them, because empires like divide and conquer. The colonial period left Africa with 54 or 55 countries, depending on how you count it. That's a lot. And each one by itself cannot achieve the future that it wants. It can't resist the diplomacy or the attacks on diplomacy by itself. It can't resist the pressures. It can't resist the financial squeeze. It can't resist the instabilities that come from a market that's too small. Unity is the key. Solidarity is the key. And also, this is why this university is so crucial, because you are not only the University of South Africa, you are a South African university all over Africa. So I'm reading UNISA as Universities of Africa, because you are not only the leader here, but you're a leader across the continent. And so on your own campuses and your connections with other universities around this continent, work together to pull the unity of knowledge, of education, of training, and of good advice to the national governments and to the empowerment of the African Union as a true union. And I want Africa to make the continental free trade area really work. I want this continent is the same size as India and China in population. Actually, a little bit bigger than China, probably just about the same with India right now. 1.5 billion people in Africa, 1.5 billion people in India, 1.4 billion people in China. They're the little one on the block. China ended its poverty in 40 years through good planning and this mass national scale. India is on the path of ending its poverty now. It's about 15 years behind China in the reforms that opened up that led to the rapid takeoff. It's time for Africa now, as this giant, as a continental scale economy, to be the era of takeoff. And that will come with a continental scale economy and a continental scale strategy. And that means solidarity. So I want to commend you for the wonderful role that you're playing. I would like to say that for me, the single most important investment for the next 20 years is to make sure that this is the fastest learning continent, that this is a continent that is filled with knowledge, filled with education everywhere. By the way, the adults, the children, this should be a time of the greatest advancement of learning and knowledge in Africa, and what you will learn will help light the whole world. Thank you very much.